Good evening. Welcome to the committee of the whole. It is 6:48. It appears all trustees are present except for, is trustee Maher on the phone?
Yes.
Here.
Hi, trustee Maher. Hope you're having a good time. And trustee Bachhorst went home to get something and she'll be back shortly. Was this publicly noticed?
The meeting was posted and noticed according to law.
Excellent. I think we have 2 items on the agenda. If we don't get to the last item, we will defer it to the next meeting. The first item is review, it's number 5, review of auditor's report on cash handling procedures.
So we have Dan Berg here from Sickish. He is a team of auditors that comes in, but he is the lead of the team. We are working with each year. And
He's a partner at the firm too.
Pardon?
He's a partner at the firm too.
Oh, you are a partner. You know Dan Berg is a partner. Mr. Parker? That's Sickish.
Well, welcome, Mr. Partner. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. If you'd like, I could just run through kind of a high level, and then if anyone has any questions, please feel free to jump in. Try to make this a little more conversational. By any means, don't save your questions to the end. You might forget them. So, generally speaking, every year when we come in to do the audit, we do a review of the transaction processing procedures, and that entails gaining an understanding of the village's internal controls over each of the transaction cycles. We're talking cash receipts, cash disbursements, purchasing, utility billing and receiving, payroll, and we look at the documentation the village has assembled. We compare that to prior years, see what's changed, and then we sit down with the various clerks throughout the village hall and other locations, particularly the police station, to kind of walk through a few transactions to make sure that things are operating the way it's described. So that's the first thing we do. This year, as a result of that, or during that, we met with staff, talked about a whole bunch of things, including the possibility of us coming back to do more on-site observation at each of the cash receiving locations. And they're listed in my memo of the ones that we went and talked to. And basically, literally observe the physical surroundings, talk to the individuals, see where physically cash and receiving is held in between transactions and perhaps overnight. Talk to the staff about potential improvements that could be made, and simply inquire and then follow up with management to see if anything could be or has been changed or is readily accepted, because not everybody had answers right off the top of their head on how something could be amended and whether it was possible.
I have a question for you. It sounded like from the memo that this has been an issue that you've been addressing for a while. Is that not correct?
So during the course of our, especially preliminary field work, but also during final field work, we talk to staff about where we see potential for improvement, and then staff will go back and take a look at it and say, you could tweak this for minimal cost, but the cost-benefit relationship is always at front of mind to determine whether or not, well, should we put a cash receipt in an area that only receives X number of dollars a day, or $500 a week, or what have you. So it's always an ongoing conversation of would it be worth it and what are the risks, certainly.
So when your paragraph at the bottom of the first page for the slide, you mentioned cost-benefit considerations. You say risk of management override and risk of collusion are inherent limitations. What does management override and risk of collusion, what are those risks?
So people that have the most access to the computer system itself could potentially make changes, adjusting journal entries, etc., that may or may not be documented and approved by others. That would be an override of control. The way the BSNA system works, though, a footprint, if you will, is left. And there's evidence of changes being made within the system to transactions. So that would be override of control. Collusion would be to get around an auditor management finding. Two individuals create a transaction, maybe fictitious, maybe change something about it, and the approver would approve. That would take two people minimum.
Trustee Moore?
I just have a couple of, as we kind of frame this up, before we get too deep into the actual specific findings. I had kind of a question as to the intro. This strikes me as kind of a light audit. And I know it's a task, but it strikes me as a light audit. And when I've seen audits, basically audits result in kind of findings. You track those findings and you kind of track them as closed or something where it's kind of risk assessment. So my question, getting to my question here is, we have this task and you've outlined a lot of different things and some recommendations. Do we anticipate rolling this into kind of our audit findings and then tracking those issues and marking them kind of open, closed in sort of the manner that you usually treat an audit? I guess my question is, I read this, I see it, what are the next steps in terms of how it's going to be used? Is it something that is going to inform down the road? I just want to make sure that we continue to build on this, so I wanted to table some of that.
So the way we approached this was as a consulting engagement as opposed to as part of the audit. So it's a little bit separate from the audit, and what we anticipated in our discussions with management and staff was that this would lead to an ongoing conversation and not necessarily part of the audit findings.
Okay.
But why not? Why wouldn't it be a finding?
Well, it depends on the level of risk and whether or not we actually found anything missing, which we didn't. Whether we have an actual knowledge of an issue. So these are potential, that's sort of what drove some of this, right?
Dan, could I just
Absolutely.
ask a question, maybe it would be a little more direct, is that most of, any audit finding would be incorporated in the annual audit, regardless.
Mhm.
These are areas of focus where, we took an opportunity to better document our processes. We've made some improvements. We've got some recommendations to make additional improvements. But by and large, anything that would have risen to a level of an audit finding has already been addressed in previous audits or ongoing audits. So this is kind of a second tier review to strengthen our processes and procedures. Does that accurately characterize your perspective on it?
Absolutely.
And just for one more clarification question, I don't know if that makes sense to me that you have to have a finding. Sometimes when I read your audits, I see, you need to tighten up here. It doesn't mean that there's actual crime or anything that's happened.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You're just reviewing the process and seeing where internal controls. I just remember when I first got here, because we're so small, the checks and the finance department only had one person, and so you have to balance that. I just remember the whole conversation. It wasn't that anyone was doing anything wrong. It was just the fact that, we were a small staff.
Mm-hmm. And there needs to be a segregation of duties, a second set of eyes on every transaction, and things of that nature. Absolutely.
Okay.
So really, we kind of felt like this would be an ongoing conversation and also would gain assistance from management and the board as to if there's something else we can help with or make recommendations or what's feasible, and kind of get a lay of the land on what you feel is the cost-benefit relationship or cost-benefit of implementing some of these. Does that make sense?
Trustee Moore?
But I guess to maybe put a fine point in it, so knowing that we've requested this task to be done, and knowing you've taken a look at all these different procedures across the different departments, I would anticipate, and I would hope that you confirm that these are the kinds of issues that will be incorporated into future audits of the village, and you'll continue to, when you say ongoing conversation, that you'll continue to look at these things, and look at any gaps or any improvement opportunities that we need to close.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that was just a question I had that, I mean, we have found some areas with a real lack of internal controls, and we were informed that they were discussed with you, and that was my question of, well, why did they never make it into the audit report?
As you kind of go through this, you'll see that a vast majority of the revenues the village receives are going through one of the many computer systems and automated cash receipting that you have, be it the BS&A.
The risk wasn't large enough.
I'm sorry?
Was it just the risk wasn't large enough? I think that's what I read.
That's the biggest thing. We have to take in account as an auditor, what the risk of material, of a material deficiency, a material weakness would be, and would be material to the financial statements. So the total amounts that the village takes in a given year, some of the sites take in a less than 1%, combined of various, if you combine some of the smallest sites, it's less than 1% of the revenues. So if you take them individually, it would be pretty small.
Mr. Warren.
Sorry to ask so many questions. So I appreciate that, and I kind of appreciate kind of the way you laid it out. I guess my question would be, there are several recommendations, as we go through these sections, there are myriad recommendations, and I'm wondering, will there be, and some of them are kind of hanging out there a little bit, as if we would recommend this, that, or the other thing. Like maybe this is a question for Rebecca. Do we have a plan in place to either say, well, this risk is so small, we're not going to implement, or we're implementing this? Do we? I guess I just want to know if we have a plan to address these piece by piece.
Great question. Now that we've received the report and had that opportunity with you, then the next step is actually to be taking that back to the department heads with their respective areas, and then talking through what we're going to be working on with respect to the recommendations.
Okay.
But I'm happy to have the report back to you.
And who's the author in blue? So I was just wondering who was asking those questions online. It was like, and who has access to this computer? And who has access to this drawer?
Those were some of the questions that we came up with during the course of reviewing that document, and they were answered by staff.
Okay, because it wasn't answered in the document. That's something I was lacking in reading it.
Well, again, there's several references in the report to these issues have been updated and accepted by staff and updated into the final policies. So we have done that. We've provided the original document for context, and then the final policy document takes a variety of these comments already into incorporation into those written procedures. And then there'll be several recommendations that, again, Rebecca and I will work out with department heads and decide which one of those we can do independently, which ones would need board approval because of cost, those types of items. And
either way, since we have the report now, is it possible to bring us an update? Because I am interested in knowing how many people have access and how, if it was if you felt as a department it was a problem, how does it work? It doesn't even have to vote on it, but just an update on the ones that you move forward with.
well, I'd be happy to do that. The context of those comments is it says, deposit will be verified, put in there, and it said will be verified by the library director. I mean, that's the extent of the change. It just who, and make sure the policy had that clarity to it.
Okay.
It wasn't so matter of who. It was just saying who was going to do it in the policy to make those policies the strongest possible.
It'd be good for us to know though, because one of the things, I think I've heard it from a couple of trustees on my right, was, if you want to hold responsible, if you're overseeing management's financing, and, financing techniques and methods, you need to know who's responsible, and that there's policy in place, and I think that's what we kind of lacked going forward, and that's why this is coming up now. It's just what's the internal control, and are we all aware that and who's responsible if it doesn't happen. And so somehow just documenting that for the board would be very helpful. Trustee Moore.
No, sorry, and I agree with that sentiment. And Mark, to your points, some of the recommendations have been implemented, and that's clear in the document. Some of them are just recommendations at this point, so I guess my ask would be just on the recommendations, just what our plan is going forward. And maybe sometimes it is such a small amount of cash that there is no recommendation to move forward, but maybe it is something like cameras in the DPW yard that will come to the board on XYZ date. So maybe just making sure we don't have things hanging out here.
So maybe this can provide some greater clarification. So it's my intent to kind of leave a record if we're going to document it, like we've taken this effort to do this. So to go through, list what we're doing or not doing based upon how that review goes, providing that back to you, and then after we get done with that step, we have met with someone already to take a review of our facilities for purposes of additional cameras for security purposes. So looking forward to getting back that suggestion from our IT vendor. And then following that, I have 3 policies that I intend to start working with you guys on that are related to financial management. But there's some that we should get in the book. The first one that we're going to start out with is the red flag policy. So red flag policy, sorry, sometimes I speak quickly.
No.
And then I have 2 more after that. So we will be at work on policy for this, for the rest of the year.
Trustee Minton.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really excellent start on cash handling, and I really commend Rebecca for moving on this and hiring the auditor to do this. I do want to mention, though, 2 other areas that I think we might have weakness, and that's on fixed asset inventories. If it's not just cash, it's also things, and that we're responsible for tracking and ensuring that we maintain. At some point, we have a new procurement policy, and I think things are pretty buttoned down, but another area in my experience in government of potential fraud is involved basically procurement process and kickbacks and that kind of thing. So, I just want to point those out as other potential areas for loss that we should, not lose sight of. But yeah, I think we should, can we go, so I had a question on clerk and customer service where you said, in reviewing tasks performed by village employees on behalf of the foundation, the village may have additional legal and insurance exposure against which the village should consider taking steps towards securing additional protection. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but are we going to be looking at that more closely, and will you be coming with recommendations?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So that was a note that kind of entered this report late in the game. As part of this process, we asked everyone to step back and say, think about what you do within the scope of your duties, and some things, some people have been doing a lot of the same things for years. So for those of you who aren't aware, in the past, the foundation used to be a volunteer committee of the village. And then over time, they grew into their own 501(c)(3). And so they have their own separate governance structure. However, some of the duties that go along with that never actually left the village. So and it's just one of those things that happens over the course of time. In this particular instance, and Mark will be quick to point out that those funds don't come through our systems. However, they are collected here and entered into the foundation systems.
Yes, the confusing one, right?
Right, so while it's not, for purposes of this report, it's noted just because it is something that we need to look at, because they are their own governance structure and they aren't necessarily a body of the village. And I just think it's something over the course of time. We want to be collaborative and helpful, but at the same time, it was helpful for us because Diane has been the liaison to this committee for several years, and she's reviewing her future here with the village because she's looking forward to a retirement. And so it's likely a topic that I'm going to be talking with both you and the foundation with moving forward.
I have a question, though. Sorry, I'm going to touch more right after. But wasn't there there was 2 times that was mentioned about, I think it was the library, Friends of the Library as well. And so it's not, and I think what we're talking about is public art and Friends of the Library. Those are the 2 that.
No, I was referring to the Shorewood Foundation.
Right, but isn't the only thing we accept money really for them for is public art?
Yeah, it says Friends of the Library, we
And Friends of
receive
the Library.
funds for the, when you buy a book.
Yep, so I understand what it's saying, I understand the accounting method, and I always, but it is a very big issue because we also have a bid that's looking at a 501(c)(3), creating them within it, so I don't know where that's gonna go, but, it's important that all of these nonprofits that we handle are treated the same and accurately controlled, have internal controls.
And make sure you understand which ones you are providing
Yes,
employee services for and which ones are more or less on their own, and making sure that you mitigate your risk.
okay. Trustee Moore?
And so just to kind of try to put a little bit of code on this, yeah, I think that the issue is arising because, you know, these functions are not being performed in the course and scope of the employment with the village, which means that you might have some legal and insurance exposure. That might be something that could be ameliorated with just a service agreement reflecting what's being done and providing the village some protections. Now, you don't expect those protections to ever come into place, but, you know, things like that, just memorializing what you're currently doing, perhaps through a service agreement.
It's like an MOU? Is that what we have with the CBA?
We do with the CDA, I will note, I'm not looking to add on to any of these responsibilities.
Oh, no, not
Just so we're,
not
just
saying-
so we're clear. Okay. Okay, because I
saying-
will definitely anticipate providing some of my thoughts relative to what they are now. You know, I think we want to be helpful, but that is not the primary scope of where we're at. Okay, all
Not
right,
saying that
just
at all.
want to know.
Yes, yes.
But yes, we can find a mechanism, a service agreement or MOU of which to do that. But keep in mind that it's also important that the organization knows what they're currently doing with us, because it's ultimately their responsibility. And I don't want to be in this, it's the nature of, just every once in a while you hear things pop up in the news about small nonprofits or school organizations where there are issues of this nature. And I have no concern that is happening here, but it's always important for me to have everyone understand what each person's, what each organization's doing, and also knowing that they willingly agree to do that. And just understanding kind of what those terms are. Just to Trustee Warren's part, documenting, what we're looking to do.
Good best practice.
Or make, what is it, making a receivable rather than a,
Well, currently, those two entities aren't being utilized. The cash receiving isn't going through the BSNA system, so it might be a better internal control to receive it through the village's system rather than having the village employee or the foundation's volunteer do it into a secondary system. So this way you would have all the internal controls of BSNA, but not hit as a revenue of the village, rather a due to, and then the village could work out the timing as to frequency of remittances to the foundations.
that sounds great, because we just went through public art, I think that simplifies it.
So we'll come, I did not anticipate that being the largest part of our discussion.
Yeah, I had the same exact question,
Yeah, we will come back and talk about it more.
Anybody else have questions? Oh, I'm sorry. But anybody on the board first? Any further questions at the moment? Trustee Menton, and then I'll call upon residents.
I mean, it seems that, I met with Rebecca earlier today, but it seems that if we, to the extent we get away from cash and go to just using a Square and online payments, that makes all of this a lot easier. So I don't know if we have policies or ways that we can encourage cash rather than, encourage online or Square rather than cash.
Or check.
And prepayments online, putting out a receipt for the DPW or the senior center, things of that nature that could be done online,
Right.
obviously. Some organizations use, you buy a tag or a sticker or whatever that you would put on the TV or whatever you're disposing of over at DPW. And you pick that up at Village Hall or
They,
tremendous number of options.
Yeah, we should look at some of those options to try to, I mean, for the senior resource center in particular or something. And then I noticed that we have to pay $2 per deposit for each individual department, and I don't know if there's a way around that, like to consolidate our deposits, or I also suggested that we meet with North Shore Bank, who we have quite a large volume of deposits on with that bank. And I would think that we could try to negotiate that we wouldn't have this fee every single day for each department for our deposit. I mean, it just seems like with the volume of property tax that we have on deposit at the bank, that they could, you know, figure out a way to. It's not like that, nickel and dime us on deposits.
The reason I mentioned that in here is that some of the deposits for individual days, if daily deposits were implemented at some of the sites would be very small.
Right.
And we would need a percentage of it. Whether it's too much or too little a percentage, that's really important.
I've never been charged for a deposit in my business. That's the weirdest thing. I've never heard of that. Is there a way to just have police pick up all the money every day? And
That was another question. Is that really good use of police
I
time?
know they're
to be
coming to
doing
like,
this?
it's better just at a certain time of night, you pick up every deposits, you know, all the deposits.
Well, again, the fee is a transaction cost of the bank. It's not how many times you drop off deposits, it's how many deposits that you're filling out. So we've got 6 collection sites at the village, potentially doing deposits every day in amounts of $20, $30, $40 a day, and then we get charged a $2 fee for every one of those we turn in. That's where you get the balance, and some departments do deposits twice a week or once a week. Many of them do daily deposits, and the police do pick those up every day and take those to the bank.
Just department.
You know, I mean, I think to Trustee Menta's point though, with our volume of the deposits for property taxes and whatnot, do we have any ability to work with North Shore Bank and have that fee waived? I mean, I just think that in my business practice, that is a best practice, that deposits should be made every single day, regardless of the amount. That it should just be our policy. We shouldn't be having cash left over from the previous day. You know, and I don't know what that would entail to have the North Shore Bank, you know, allow us to make his 6 deposits and not, I mean, and that even actually seems more ridiculous
We have a
that
fee-
we're charged for each
We have a
deposit.
fee review with North Shore Bank every year.
Okay,
Um,
so I think.
We have a
once
lot of
we-
transactions,
Yeah.
and it's,
But we're.
I'll just tell you
Withdraw.
from their perspective, we're costly clients to maintain. And I also just, also mention that we really don't hold our tax deposits at North Shore Bank. You know, we invest those at the local government investment pool now, so
Then
again,
maybe we need to look into a different bank to make those deposits, because I just think being charged $2 every time we have a deposit slip,
yeah.
and if they're not willing to work with us to make those changes. then
Well, we could certainly put an RFP for banking services out there and see what kind of responses we would get.
Trustee Warren, and then I have a question for her.
Yes. I mean, maybe just kind of thinking about a middle ground here, I don't think it hurts to have a conversation, just say, hey, you know, we're doing 6 deposits a day, maybe you just charge us once.
Mhm.
I just think maybe if we just have an informal conversation and see what comes of it. If they say, absolutely not, we'll never do that, you're paying $2 no matter what, maybe we can come back and talk, but, you know, maybe given our long history, they just say, yeah, we think that's reasonable.
I've had those conversations already. I do that every year with
Let
them.
us sit in the room with you, with 2 trustees.
Yeah,
So-
I think we should RFP. We should go to RFP and see if we can get a better deal.
I'm just joking. But the other option is, I mean, it also sounds like it's a lot. Okay, so do they call the police and say, you don't have to come by today because we only have 20s, but come by tomorrow? Would it be more easily executed? Just to say at 6 o'clock or whatever, you know, we pick up all the deposits and if they're not ready, they're not ready?
Currently, the police comes to the customer service desk, so all deposits are brought to
Right,
the
so I
village
read
hall,
that.
so there's only one stop for the police officer right now.
Every day. Yeah. That's current practice.
And then deposit it. So
They
why
transport that to the bank, that's correct.
one deposit?
No,
It's a
deposits
different-
from every department.
Okay.
It's a different, banker's bag, locked banker's bag for each department. They're brought over intact.
We'll open them all up and put them all in one, put all the receipts.
Well, then you lose custody control.
I understand.
That's, I mean, then you use custody and control issues with deposits, which is a pretty critical
I understand.
internal control thing. So, yes, it would solve the problem, but then it weakens other processes at the same time.
I understand. Trustee Butters?
No? I just wonder if we're moving along.
Okay. Trustee Armenta?
Yeah, I just wanted to note at the Senior Resource Center, at both places where someone is keeping a log of activity, either the Senior Resource Center, they had a cash receipts log for whatever activity they're doing, or at Public Works where there's still a log. That there's still an opportunity for someone to take cash and just not put it on the log. So I don't know how to protect against that. I mean, we'll have a camera at DPW at Senior Resource Center. You could have somebody else check how many people were there at the luncheon and then verify that the cash, then verify with the number of people that matches the amount of money.
Or the outings,
Right.
same thing. That's why one of the suggestions we had is for the sign-up sheet for the dance classes, dance exercise classes, be kept by the instructor and then matched up to the paid
Okay.
amounts
Right.
as another control.
Can I make a suggestion though I know that the senior center probably would have a lot of cash because older people don't use their debit cards as much and I know this, and I'm getting up there, it's, I can't use Apple Pay, so, I mean, I'm gonna be one of those soon. But, is it, for DPW yards, wouldn't it make sense to just get this little square button or whatever kind of swiper and that's it, you just don't take cash? I mean, it's so simple these days and it's not like, or a check, they can do a check.
Well, you know,
A card or a credit.
cash is not the only risk here. The risk is not properly reporting transactions.
Oh,
So
right.
whatever mechanism you use to take payment is only one aspect.
But
If you're not charging people the proper amount, or you're not charging all of the people, you know, that's really the next set of
I can tell you, own
controls you
business.
want to get on.
And
And
the
that
easiest way to
requires
hide
two
it is
people.
to take cash.
What do you mean
So-
not charging someone? So you just say, oh, go ahead and don't pay? I mean.
Yes, that's exactly what I mean.
Anyone can do that, but I'm just, for simplicity, as a business owner, not taking cash is the quickest way to, you know, the most efficient way to firm up your internal controls, because cash is very hard to trace.
It would require a device, it would require the individual to be trained on that device and the system.
Just like-
It would require full compliance, which means you turn away people with cash.
All right,
Or the potential to prepay online or finding stickers.
all right.
There are options.
Trustee Buck.
Okay, so in the interest of, getting through the rest of this discussion, and also, I think these are some great suggestions, but I feel that we're using our board time here to, in some, like, maybe a little too much into operations. And again, these are great questions, and maybe when the staff comes back to us with, the next steps, and, then at that time, we could read all that ahead of time, ask staff directly questions before we get to the board meeting, et cetera. But I really don't think it's incumbent upon us to discuss, cash handling and all the different bank things right now, just because we have a full agenda, we don't have to make any sort of agenda. That's all I'm saying.
Well, we are in committee, just to remember.
Right, but we will start late on full board because we've got 8 minutes.
As I said at the beginning, this is such an important topic for a lot of the trustees around the table that we
Yeah.
may defer the second item, if necessary. Does anybody else have any questions?
So what are our next steps? Rebecca, you'll come with some next steps on
Well, we're going to be
implementing these
taking,
recommendations.
the report is here. I know that there's a lot of people requesting to see the report, and so we're going to provide it to both the board and the department heads as soon as we did receive it. So it's coming to this evening. We haven't even had an opportunity to discuss it with staff on our part, because when we came in I was literally getting it when it was being put into the packet for upload to all of you today, so we'll be going through that process. And then having those discussions, we can provide an outcome of those discussions and report. There are also other pieces that we're going to start and continue with here. So then next, my attention will also be in reviewing with IT their thoughts on additional security equipment at each site. So,
Great, I'm sorry, I forgot to ask the resident if he still had a question.
I do.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Just state your name and address.
My name is Jeff Davidian from 4101 North Prospect. You know, every year the health department goes around to restaurants, and a lot of times you see the restaurant has an A in the middle of it, they got a grade. Grade. But they didn't begin as A's. They began with flies and cockroaches, and then the state tells them to correct it, and then they get the A, and they say we've got an A. But between those A's, there are F's. So can you grade Shorewood, the way that it's managed these issues that you've audited? What grade does Shorewood get before they correct them?
So as an auditor, I'm generally a pass-fail guy, as opposed to a grade. And my audit opinion
I love those classes.
is based on materiality. My job is to determine whether the financial statements are materially correct. The management letter in recent years has not had significant findings by any stretch, did not have material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. So I will refrain from giving an A, B, C, but I will say that we have have had a lack of findings.
Will it have an A? Will there be an A after they do the things that you suggest?
Well, again, I'm not in the habit of giving grades.
Well, let's go, but beside what you're in the habit of doing, help us out to
I
understand.
I think this is helpful.
Okay.
I don't think this is helpful.
Well, I do, this is my chance, Thank you very much.
So I'm going to refrain from giving a grade. I'm
Yeah.
going to say that my lack of findings can be interpreted as you will, and as the board and staff determine that grade to be. But I have not had significant issues with management and the internal controls themselves, their design and their implementation.
And just help out, and then I just want to make one comment.
Is that
I think it's going to come in, it's the board's responsibility to really do that A, B, C, D, and F, whatever you want to call the ranking, because again, as the report here notes from a consultant, not being an audit, they're not materialistic, so it wouldn't rise to the level of a finding. But because we want to be fiscally responsible, and I praise the board for bringing the issues up, and I praise Rebecca tremendously for getting on it without us even knowing. I mean, she was right on it. So, and that's exactly what we want in the village manager. And so I think, guys, and I would say that I don't know for an A, B, C, D, or F, depending on when we talk about it, decide whether that's material or not, enough for us to take action and do a different step. And I think that'll be the next, my assumption is that's going to be the next one here from Rebecca, is that correct? Like, you'll be coming to us to talk more about which ones are material, what we feel is enough. Okay. Trustee Buck.
I just wanted to say that this is a great exercise. I really appreciate this. And with all the other things that we've been looking through, organizational study, parking analysis, everything else, we've been doing a lot of studies and a lot of, I don't know, we'll say research and other things. And you guys do this every year, and I appreciate the work and the findings and the way that you've been able to lay this out. And maybe assuage some of the fears or rumors that have been going around in the community, as well as, educate and enlighten those in the community and us as well.
All right. Any further questions from the board? Well, if not, thank you so much for taking your time coming to see us and for helping us tighten up our controls.
Please let me know if I can do anything in the future to assist you.
Okay, sounds good. So we do have one other item. I'm gonna look at Rebecca, and I know do you think? do you
It's
have any
7:25, so we begin our next meeting at 7:30.
What would
I
you
don't
like to do?
I don't care, either way.
I think we probably have to
Yeah,
defer
we're
it.
not gonna get 35 minutes.
But 4 to 5 minutes
Just be
probably.
realistic.
Unless we were gonna go over, and we can also do that, but
Probably be best that we shift
Well,
to-
I would like to actually suggest something. I think we should defer this item, but I think we should defer this, for 2 reasons. One, we should wait until the new elected officials are sworn in, because this is, we're potentially impacting salary of all of us involved, and we have 2 outgoing members who are not seeking reelection, so we will have 2 new trustees. This is a great discussion for them to be involved in as well. And then secondly, we should defer this. I would even consider deferring it further, maybe more on the decision-making aspect, but to around budget time, since this will have a financial impact on, taxes. We do ask
I'm fully
for
in favor of that.
a raise in our wages. This is something that we have to look at in regards to the other items that are up for consideration.
Great. And I would like, with that comment, I'm 100% supportive of what Trustee Bachler said. I've said it every year in budget. I would like to do it during budget, and staff always recommends we do it outside of the budget.
Oh, yeah, we should have the discussion prior, but we shouldn't make the decision until budget time, is what I meant by that.
Yeah, and so that's why, yes, Mark.
Yeah, and I appreciate you mentioning that. I always try to steer this away from budget, because I think, as everybody knows that's participated in the budget, there's a tremendous amount of time spent going through the various aspects of the budget that a full-blown discussion on policy matters are just extremely difficult to have during a budget cycle. So I would just reiterate that I'd like policy decisions to be made prior to budget, and the budget will reflect the policy decisions that the board has made.
And I understand that and get that, but we have had some criticism from the community that because you're doing it outside the budget, not as many eyes are on you when you're making those discussions, so maybe we just need more budget sessions, if that would, I'm fine with that as well. Trustee Menta?
I agree with not doing it during budget, because it's going to be a difficult discussion, and, we have more people here than we ever have in most budget sessions, right? So, I agree with Mark to try to tackle this issue in the context of the budget. I mean, really, we only had 3 meetings, and that's introduction to our final meeting, going down the list. So, every year we try to make it more and more compact. So I just don't I see that we need to discuss this and have some idea of where we want to go. I mean, I'm not saying we adopt it. I think we should adopt it, like, let's say it's going to be an extra 10,000 a year starting in 2021. Certainly we should, adopt a dollar amount during budget, but for right now, I do think we need to have the preliminary discussion outside of budget.
Trustee Carpenter, and then Trustee Warren, and then Trustee Bachler, if you still want your hand is.
I think that we all have that same sentiment that the policy needs to be made the policy decision needs to be made outside of the budget cycle, but I think the ultimate decision, the mathematical decision needs to be made within the context of the budget. So I think, do we need to make a motion to move, or could we move to defer the item and have Rebecca maybe slot, can I just ask the question of Rebecca? At a time where we have the opportunity, and maybe that's earlier in the fall, or
Now.
That's
I
fine.
mean, or after the election.
well, yes, right after
We're trying to do tonight.
So, yeah, so I mean,
Right on time.
so that was sort of my question, was move it to, another meeting where we have additional time, and then plan that sometime within the budget process to finish the conversation.
Trustee Warren,
No.
and his records, yes.
I'm just saying,
No, you spoke, you said I was next, Deborah.
No, it was trustee Quigley, trustee Warren, and then trustee Bachus, if your hand was
And I was
up.
gonna agree with you very quickly with it. And just quickly, I think at the very least, it should go behind when the two new trustees were on the board, but those
Okay.
are.
So I move to defer this item until after the two new trustees are sworn in.
Second.
Further discussion, I just want to, for clarification purposes, that is, I'm, okay, I do not want to run into the same situation we did this year where papers get filed, so that means we have that short window, and I know staff understands what I'm talking about, to bring it back to the board and get it on the agenda. And I also believe that, you know, if the agenda is full, we either have to talk about it or we don't talk about it, and so otherwise, I don't believe we're going to have enough time to have
April
conversation in the budget. So,
Okay.
that
We have
way,
work to
yeah,
do?
so between
Okay.
now and sometime before budget, and then also before, yeah, the next papers are filed, which it would be before the next budget. Okay, sounds great, so we have a motion and a second, any further discussion?
What's the motion again?
To defer this item until the two new trustees are sworn in. So it will be after,
May.
May 4th would be the first.
Second meeting, yeah. I think it's fine as long as we have it before budget. Okay.
Any?
You guys vote?
No, we were
Not
not.
yet.
Okay, I was like,
Jeez, you want the gavel?
no.
All righty then, no, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, motion carries 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
That's more of a question.
Oh, is Mike's on the phone though, right? Mike, are you on the phone? Trustee Maher, you lost him?
Maybe he's muted.
Okay, you don't get a vote.
Extension.
He's abstained. All right, yes, yeah, so we're gonna, since we deferred the motion, we will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by trustee Bachus, seconded by trustee Warren. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Do you think anyone need a break? I see trustee Bachus from the
Let's just keep going.
Okay, all right, we'll take a break. I'd like to call this village board meeting to order. It is what time? 7:34. All trustees are present except.
I'm not there. Oh, I was going to sign off after the meeting.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, have a great trip, Mike.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All trustees are present except trustee Maher, who is excused. Has this meeting been publicly noticed?
The meeting has been posted and noticed according to law.
Thank you. This is my sheet. So our first item. Okay, so our first item today is special order of business, agenda item number 4A. Consider Atwater Beach rule for smoking in designated areas. And who, hello, welcome.
Thanks for putting me in this part of the agenda. Rebecca, jump in if I'm getting carried away with my introduction and background. So essentially, we've been discussing this change in the ordinance for a while. Back when we were talking about vaping ordinances, which you passed to prohibit vaping in indoor public places similar to the street vaping. The discussion at that point last summer was to also talk about smoke-free beaches and smoke-free parks. And the discussion at that point was to separate it from the vaping ordinance and to gather more public information and public input with regard to smoke-free policies. So we've gathered that information. I've reported back